Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Dude. I love that. I'm Liv. And today's episode, I've been waiting for this one. I just rewatched all of Pretty Little Liars because I was inspired. If you've not seen this guy's YouTube channel, you have to. This guy, I think his channel is called Mike's Mike, and he had this entire visual board of all the characters, how they all connected, the relationships, like who dies. It was incredible. It must have taken him like weeks. And it was amazing. And I watched that. He goes through the entire series and actually talks about all the episodes and basically the most important points. It was just absolutely incredible. And so that got me inspired. And I rewatched the entire series so that I could type these characters for you, also selfishly because I love it. So, anyways, I'm so excited to do this episode today. And there's a ton to talk about. And I actually decided to do this episode as more of like, taking you through the typing process with me, if that makes sense. So this is going to be like you and me grabbing coffee, talking about our favorite characters. So let's jump in. And we're going to start with Hanna because I feel like this is probably the character that I have the most controversial typing for. And I don't know, maybe it's not controversial, but I feel, okay, so let me just preface with this. I feel like most people would be like, oh, Hanna's a 3, obviously. But no, she's not. And I can tell you why, because we're the same type. Oh my gosh. Okay. So with Hanna, the one thing that I saw was in the beginning, you do see her very 3-like, right? Like in the first season. And then when she's with Mona, I feel like that's really where you see the 3 come out. However, we're looking at the big picture, right? When we type somebody, and especially in TV shows, because that's like my love. But when we're doing this, we're looking at the big picture. So we can't just go from a single instance or one season and be like, oh, they're that. Or even as broad as, oh, they're into fashion and makeup. They have to be a 3. It's like, that's not it at all. And counterphobic 6s. So if you didn't know, I'm a counterphobic 6 and with a 7 wing, but I have a very strong 5 wing as well. So maybe I have equal wings, but that's a discussion for another time. So yeah, I think Hanna is a counterphobic 6. And that is because throughout the series, we see her go through this push and pull of, wanting to be perceived a certain way, not feeling good enough about herself. I feel like in her mind, also, if you're watching this on video, when I'm thinking, sometimes I have kind of like this situation going on where I'm like squinting and it might look like I'm judging you, but I'm not. I'm thinking. Also, I tend to look off to the side when I think. So again, all good. This is like we're having a conversation in a coffee shop. So with Hanna, I think there is a lot of that negative self-talk, I guess. I think there's a lot of underlying anxiety. And the one season, I'm going to say it's season 5, might be season 4. It's where she kind of decides that, yeah, Allison like ruled the way that I looked, basically. I looked the way that I looked because I wanted to emulate what Allison had going on. And we see obviously in flashbacks that Allison's very I mean, she's terrible. She's very rude, very critical of people's looks, and she's just very judgy and nasty. But I think even though Hanna wasn't always on the receiving end, she heard what Allison was saying and kind of applied it to herself out of fear for not wanting that judgment to come on her, if that makes sense, which I think is a very sick thing to go through. And I know for myself, I had situations in my life like that, and people would say things about other people that they saw, and I was like, ooh, what if I did that? Or, oh my gosh, I kind of do that sometimes. I wonder if they think that about me. And so she goes through this whole process in, like I said, I think it's season 5, where she goes to the hair salon and basically gets the entire underneath of her hair black and then has the blonde on top, which honestly I thought was going to look terrible, but it looked so good. But she goes through her whole like emo phase and it's so good. But throughout that, we see that there's this little bit of that 6-ish, that counterphobic 6-ish going into the fear. And she's like, no, I'm going to take it back. Like, how dare you? I'm going to go for it now. Like, I'm going to be who I really want to be. And we see her that entire season. She like doesn't wear a shred of pink and going through that. But again, we're not looking at a single season. We're looking at everything all together. So I want to just tie this all in. Several instances happen across the show where I'm like, no, she's definitely a counterphobic 6. Also, if you haven't heard previous episodes where I've touched on a counterphobic 6, counterphobic 6s, which is the one-to-one or sexual subtype 6, they look a lot like a 3 or an 8, depending on like more of their personality. I guess some people are more blunt and I guess focused on loyalty and their inner circle and things like that, like an 8. And then some are a little more focused on appearance and achievements, like a 3. And so with Hanna, I think she does tend towards more of the 3. But what I love about her character is I think she has the most development out of all the characters throughout the series. And one of the hallmark things with her that I saw that really was like, yeah, definitely a 6, is when she befriends Caleb and everybody, also Lucas, now that I'm thinking about it. But when she sees something in Caleb and she like goes after it and is like, no, I think there's value here and I'm going to help him. That felt so 6 to me. And I think we're seeing these girls when they're already pretty stressed, like they've been through so much that most people will never go through in an entire lifetime. And so obviously things are heightened and they're acting more probably out of stress than they are their pure selves, if that makes sense. The interesting thing that I want to talk about really fast is when you're in prolonged stress, what happens is you tend to actually go to your health number and stay there and become the low side of that number. So, for instance, if Hanna really is a 6, what she's going to do in prolonged stress is she's actually going to go to 9 because that's her health number. She's going to go there and go to the more low side, which again, going back to season 5, I think that's, like I said, I think it's season 5, might be wrong. But going back to that, she becomes more of the when 9s are in really low levels of health, there can be problems with substance abuse, and we see her basically relying on alcohol for the first half of that season. And she also is in this kind of sloth mode, which, if you don't know, the passion of 9s is sloth. And so that means there's a resistance to doing things for fear of it like upsetting their peace, because 9s are very focused on keeping that inner peace. And so if they feel like things are crazy outside and they can't really maybe fix anything, or it's out of their control, they go into this sort of zombie state where they rely on substances or food or something like that. They rely on something in order to help them cope. And then they can also become depressed, which I think we definitely see with her later on. They can become very tired and just sort of asleep to the world, which I think we also see because she begins ditching classes more than usual. I don't even know how these girls graduated. Like, were you even there? I don't know. And then we see her kind of merging a little bit, which 9s also do. And you can look that up because I don't want to get too into it, or else this episode's going to be so long. I'll probably do an episode on that later on because it's fascinating to me. But she kind of becomes merged with Caleb, and they're sort of both going through the same problem at the same time. And so they kind of glob onto each other and are like, we'll get through this together. And it becomes more toxic than it is helpful. But anyways, all of that to say, this is how I became solidified in her type being a counterphobic 6. And I talk more about counterphobic 6s in an episode, and I'm blanking on which one. But long story short, if you just want a super fast explanation, normal 6s, I guess, not really normal, but you know what I mean. Like when you typically think of a 6, you think of the self-preserving or social subtype 6. These 6s are going to be more focused on what other people think they should do. And they're going to need a little bit more groupthink, right? They're going to bring their situations up to others that they trust and kind of ask for more feedback, which the counterphobic 6 does too, but maybe not as much. The self-preserving 6 definitely does it the most. And then when it comes to fear and anxiety, Self-preserving and social sixes shrink back and run away, or they just freeze, right? So we're talking like fight, flight, or freeze. They are the types to flight or freeze. Whereas the counterphobic six is like, hey, wait a second. No, no, I'm not going to let this like overtake me. I'm not going to let this thing have power over me. And so they actually charge towards it. So they fight. And that's what sometimes gets them mixed up with an eight. And then threes can have that too sometimes, but mostly it's the eights. And so that's where we definitely see her more and more when she starts like gaining more of a sense of herself. We see her become very protective of those in her inner circle, which I love. And then we also see her become less scared of A and more like, I'm going to hunt this sucker down and it's going to end, which I think is a really, really cool transformation. So that is Hanna for you. And then, sorry, that was super long-winded, but I feel like there's so much to say and I just love doing this so much. So if it gets a little intense, I'm sorry, but let's move on to Spencer. I am so excited to type her because I went through this process where in the first season, I'm like, oh my gosh, she's the poster child for a one. Like she was so one-ish to me. And then I started to realize she's not a one. Just take a second. Guess what you think she is? I'll wait. Okay. So I typed her as an eight. And the reason was I figured out she's not a one. Then I was like, is she a three? Because she seems very like achievement oriented. And then, which again is like, you can't just say like, because they want achievements and to be valedictorian, they're a three. You know what I mean? Like there's so many different factors. And with Spencer, I think the core thing here is she is in a very one-ish family, in a very three-ish family. And I think there's a lot of that. They definitely are focused on presenting an image socially. And that's not wrong or bad. I'm just saying I see this in the course of the show. I think there's this pressure because Melissa, her older sister, was very much the perfect Hastings. And I'm guessing that she felt compared to her. And that's why she began to act out a little bit and not like in the typical ways that you act out as a teenager. If you didn't see, I put quotes around act out, but she definitely dealt with a little bit of like wanting to be accepted, but also not wanting to conform. So there was this push and pull for her. And she valued Melissa, but also she kind of hated her because even though it wasn't Melissa's fault that she was being compared to her, you kind of hate the object of your comparison, if that makes sense. And so for her going through that, that's why I think she began to like Melissa's boyfriends and deal with all of that. And instead of having the respect for her sister to be like, get away from me, Ian, you nasty sucker. Is he not the worst? I hate Ian. Oh, golly. Anyways, I feel like for her, she has this like justice oriented personality, which again could be misconstrued for a one. And then she also wants to do well, wants to push herself. And that looks very three-ish. And all in all, the reason that I settled on eight is because at the end of the day, her desire to be her own person and to push herself and not live in the shadow of Melissa won out against her wanting achievements, wanting praise, and wanting to display a perfect image. And so that's where I was like, she's very eight-ish. And I think the cool thing with her is as we get further on in the show, we see that she becomes the catalyst for getting things done in a more aggressive way. I think she actually owns her aggressive personality later on. And I'm even talking like season 3. And she comes more into owning her boldness. And if we were talking about the DISC assessment, I would say she's a high D. And she's definitely the kind of person that I think if we were going to talk about tritypes, and if you don't know about tritypes, I think which one did I do tritypes for? I think it was Outer Banks. I did subtypes. yeah, if you want to learn more about subtypes, definitely check out the Outer Banks episode. I say that all the time, but just in case you're stumbling upon the podcast for the first time, check that out. And then subtypes, I'm sorry, not subtypes, tritypes. Oh, you know what? It's Shark Boy and Lava Girl. That's what it is. So, anyways, back to Spencer. Her tritype, I think, is probably an 8-3-5. If I had to guess, she's very five-ish. And that's the other thing that really helped me understand that she's an 8, because when she is interested in something, she dives in and researches it. And that's what an 8 actually does in stress. They go to 5 and they become the researcher, and they want the answers to the things that are giving them, I wouldn't say anxiety, because I don't really know any 8 that's like, I deal with anxiety, but I think it's an underlying hum of this stress. And so they want to dive deep and figure out, what is this? What's causing this? How can I fix it? And so that's where we see her be the one that really tracks down the leads for finding A. She's the one that's like, this happened and this happened and it started here and da-da-da. And she's the one that gets everybody on board with doing crazy things, which is so 8. And I love that. And also, I think it's so cute to see her relationship with Arya, because, Team Sparia, it's like Spencer's so matter of fact and bold and like, here's what we're doing. And then Arya's like, I want to do it too, but I don't know. Like, should we? There's actually a scene I'm thinking of in the last season where we see the time jump, and they're on the rooftop trying to get into Bethany's room. I'm sorry, not the rooftop. They're on the balcony from their suite trying to get into Bethany's room. And Spencer's like, yeah, come on, just do it. Like, it's fine. Just walk over. And Arya's like, you're so much taller and like you can get over there easily. And Spencer's like, come on, like, what about Team Sparia? Like, let's do it. And she basically eggs her on enough to where she goes and does it. And it's just so funny. So I love that. And I think this group of friends would not have been the same without Spencer. Oh, that's the other thing. There is a scene where basically Allison and Spencer get in a little tiff, and Spencer calls her out and is like, you expect everybody to do what you want to do when you want to do it, and I'm not going to have it anymore, and you can't hold anything over me. So ha. And I was like, ooh, okay. That definitely is so gut triad. And that's where I quickly ruled out 3 and stayed between a 1 and an 8 for a long time, because she really does act from her gut. She does. She definitely does not act from her feelings. And I don't think she acts from her head. She's like moving with the gut. And we need that. In that group of friends, you need Spencer's personality type. Okay, let's move on to Emily. This one was so easy for me. I knew what she was pretty much right away. And she is a 9. Emily is like the most 9 of all 9s. And it's so funny because every single time the girls would like get in an argument, she's always like, guys, just calm down. It's okay. It's going to be fine. And it's like, they're like headed to their death. I'm like, we all need an Emily. And the fun thing with her is that she really was the peacemaker of the group. She was the one that was pretty, I guess, steady. And I think she was steady because she was so go with the flow and could kind of go with whatever was needed at the time. But I think that also got her into trouble later on. I think she kind of lost sight of like her own desires. And that's something 9s struggle with. 9s really, they want to be peacemakers. They want to go with what everybody else wants. And so sometimes in that they lose their own voice. And I saw time and time again, she was persuaded out of what she wanted to do for what somebody else wanted to do. And I mean, that's fine, right? Like sometimes it's just good to go with the flow and like not be so hell-bent on things that you just like ruin friendships. But I think it caused a bit of a struggle for her, especially in relationships. I feel like she wasn't, I don't know, she didn't come with the sturdiness, I think, of being able to push back. But thankfully, we see a lot of growth in her, and she becomes more and more serious about what she wants and moves forward with it, even if it causes a little bit of an upset, which is a huge growth point for 9s. And to see her go through that was really cool. And especially because I don't have any 9 friends in my life. And so actually being able to see her grow up and own her opinions was really a cool thing to see, especially because I like geek out on the Enneagram. Like it's just cool to actually see it play out. How many times have I said cool? Somebody can make that a drinking game, but also please don't. So yeah, I think the thing with Emily is that we also see, kind of like I was talking with Hanna, we see Emily get a little bit more into this secretive mode when they do the time jump because she's hiding the fact that she doesn't have the success. And so this actually goes back to exactly what I was talking about with Hanna in terms of when you are in prolonged stress, you actually go back around to your health number and stay there. And I don't think I properly explained this either. I just like got so excited about talking about it. The reason that we do that is because it almost tricks our minds into thinking, no, we're in our health. Like we're looking for these things. We're striving for this. We're good. And so it's almost a coping mechanism so that we don't fully realize the severity of the situation that we're in stress wise. And so it's like kind of good, but also not good because you trick yourself and then you end up there for too long. So anyway, what we see with Emily is that the 9 goes to a 3 in health. And so when we do that time jump, so it's 5 years later, I think it's 5. When we go through that, we see that she's dropped out of school. She spent all of her dad's money that he left her when he died. And she's basically not moved on with her life. And she wants to project this image of being successful and having this job and having her degree and blah, blah, blah. And the reality is she's still bartending or a baristing, whatever the word is. But basically, she's still doing that. So she's still doing the exact same thing that she was doing when she left Rosewood. And I think that's a point of embarrassment for her, even though there's nothing wrong with that. It was a point of, I guess, lack of growth, and she was embarrassed to admit it. And so that kept her hiding things from the people closest to her for a long time. And she went through a lot of hoops to keep this story running that she was working at this institute and doing all these things. And so it was really sad to see that because I felt like Emily could have had the greatest growth of all the girls. And it was just really difficult for her after everything. I mean, obviously, like who could go through that and be like, I'm fine, but still. So that was really interesting to see for her. And I think by the end, if we were to go even like 5 years later after that time jump, I think we would see a very healthy, whole Emily that is thriving and has that inner peace and is achieving great things. Anyways, that's Emily. And then let's do Aria, who I love. She's a tough one. And this is one we're going to talk out. So with her, I think people are always like, oh, she's a 4. And yes, I see that. But I go back and forth. I'm like, is she a 4? I think she's definitely got a 4 in her tritype, like, period. There's a 4 somewhere. Is it her main type? I don't know. If she is a 4, she's definitely a self-preserving 4. And that subtype is actually called the Sunny 4. So the deal with them is that they've learned to live with the struggles of life. And they actually come off more as like a 7 or I believe a type 1. So that could be it. But I also think she's good at like calling people on their crap. And she's always kind of known what she's wanted to do. And that feels very fourish to me too. But yeah, she was okay with being different. The thing about this though that I wonder about, and if you're 4, please let me know what you think about this, because this is something that I do think about and I wish I had a 4 to ask. But I also feel like it's just like I want more feedback. So if you are a 4, please let me know what you think of this. Part of me goes, would a 4 really be in the friend group with Allison and deal with that? Or is that like too conforming? Is it too, what's the word, restrictive to their personality and like their uniqueness? Because I feel like it would be. And I also have a 4 in my tri-type. So that's why I'm kind of like thinking through that, because I'm like, wait a second, I would be like, actually, I did deal with a situation like this. If you want to go back and listen to the episode called How Liv Got Kicked Out of the Popular Group, I talk about this. And I feel like for me, I finally was fed up and I was like, you're the worst. You're actually a bully. And so I stood up to it. Arya never does. She always like just kind of continues on with it. I don't know. Maybe she's like, there's like a possibility that she's a 5-wing 4. That's interesting. That could be it. Honestly, I hate to say this because it's like now two people in the same friend group are the same type, but it would come down to subtype. It really would. Part of me is like, is she a self-preserving 6? Maybe even a social 6. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the thing tripping me up really is the whole friend group situation. I don't know. She's super loyal. Let's just talk about like her qualities here. She's very loyal. She is okay with being unique. She's always known what she's wanted to do. Like she's very clear-headed about her path, which makes me feel like that's 8-ish. She was able to keep a big secret from her family and a little bit from her friends at the beginning, which is, dating Ezra. So that's interesting. She's very fashionable. She loves fashion and she's okay with being very bold with her fashion. She didn't need to be like in the spotlight, right? Because we see in the time jump, she does become she goes to school for literature and she goes and works at this publishing company, but she's like not interested in being in the spotlight. She's like, I just want to edit and like do my thing, which I think is so sweet. Is she a 9? I do feel like she has a lot of that like 963 kind of tritype thing. So I don't know. And this is maybe something that you can guess on and tell me what you think, because like I said, I think there's a lot of things that's like definitely could be a 6, could be a 4, could be a 5. She could be a social 5. I don't really think she's a 2. I don't get that from her. Maybe also it's like birth order because she's the oldest. That definitely plays a huge part in someone's personality. And I don't think it's talked about enough, but that's interesting. That's interesting. I don't know. So, I mean, there's like I'm saying, 6, 9, 5, 4, something in that range, I definitely think is what she likely is. If she's a 9, she's definitely got an 8 wing. Emily, let's just go back to that really fast for wings. Let's do everybody's wing really fast because I totally neglected that part. So Emily's wing, she's definitely a 9 wing 1. If we're talking about Spencer, she's an 8 wing. I think she probably uses them both equally, if we're going to be honest. Yeah, I'm going to say equal. And then Hanna is definitely a 6 wing 7. And Aria just stumps me. I feel like there's so many things that like I relate to her on, but there are multiple things that kind of leave me like, that's unexpected. So I want to know your thoughts. And even if you dig into subtypes, I would love to know what you think her subtype is. Even if you can't pinpoint her type, letting me know what you think her subtype is would be so cool. Anyways, I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode and be sure and check back because I am doing a part 2 and Allison will be included in that one. I just felt like there was too much to dive into for this episode because there's just like a ton that I want to touch on. And the other girls already had so much going that I'm like, we need 2 parts. And also I want to touch on Ezra and Toby and who am I forgetting right now? Oh, Mona. I want to talk about Mona. Ooh, that's going to be such an interesting one. So anyways, be sure and check back for that episode. Also, part 2 of the 100 coming out at some point, but I really want to get this one done because it's so fresh. I'm just like ready to go. So anyways, hope that you enjoyed this episode. Be sure and check out the podcast on Instagram at Dude, I Love That Podcast. And you can find me on Instagram at Hey, It's Liv James. Anyways, trying to get 2 episodes out a week. We'll see if it happens, but be sure and keep an eye out on Instagram. That is where I announce all the episodes coming up, and I'll see you next time. Bye.